One can count that as a success, and in fact, that's how police get promoted very often, on the basis of the arrests they make, but it's also evidence of a failure. Some crime was committed and an arrest resulted. That crime could have been prevented, not simply by the police, but by the array of elements that we've all been talking about. The police have an important role to play in averting crime, preventing crime. And by preventing crime, then you don't have kids racking up huge arrest records, cementing criminal identities, and generating the kind of stigma and reduction in opportunity that is so tragic in this community and other communities. We don't want police simply making arrests. We want police to avert crime.
But I would push back on that a little bit because, again, if we're talking about violent crime, and especially homicides.
I am talking about violent crime.
Well, in violent crimes, if you're living in a city where most murderers get away with murder, it is not a comfortable place to live in. If you live in College Hill neighborhood and you had a rash of violence last year and all of those murderers are still on the street, then that is not a place that you feel comfortable in. And so when it comes to violent crimes, convictions of actual murderers is important.
Of course.
It is absolutely important, but it's actually really unfair to put that at the step of law enforcement or even the criminal justice system. You know, in some respects, the criminal justice system is kind of like the crucible of problems. You know, society's problems come out and are displayed for all to see in the courtrooms and in front of the police officers. But in reality, what precipitated that murder, none of the people at this table had anything to do with. And so the issues really do come to, if we really want to take on crime, we have to do something well before it's a law enforcement issue. We have to do something in the schools. We have to do something to support families. We have to do something to support poverty. And to lay that at the doorstep of law enforcement is really unfair.
But I think what you're talking about is crime prevention, which I completely agree with. But after a crime occurs, it is up to the judicial system, it is up to the police department, it is up to the whole system to see that justice is done.
Except
and when justice is not done, that sends a very negative, damaging message to the community.
Alderman, the number one reason, across the board, and I can name you 3 murders in the last month where no one was held accountable, and it's because the people who know about it, saw about it, won't do anything about it.
And do you understand why?
We do understand why, but we need community leaders to encourage people to come forward. We need to work with the community so that they begin, despite the decades of history and the long trauma, we have to begin to trust that system and come forward. The reason the homicides in the city, and I agree with you, it's tragic. I had a brother killed. You know what? In the situation, those families deserve better. But the people who know about it and saw about it are really the ones who can do something about it.
The Chief Dawson said something that struck me, outcomes that keep people safe. And you know, we're talking about all the things that happen prior to the offenders coming into the courts and the police custody. You know, from my simple perspective, we like to see violent offenders. Now, what we're talking about is violent crime, aggravated assaults with firearms. We like to see offenders get bonds that keep them in jail until their trial. We like to see those offenders that are charged and found guilty of violent crimes sent to the Missouri Department of Corrections to serve an extended sentence. But what we do see is the bonds and the sentences that are handed out, we see that they get undercut, it seems like, by the Missouri Department of Corrections when an offender is sentenced to 30 years in prison, and then after 15 years and 3 months, Missouri Department of Corrections, whatever their criteria is, determines, hey, this offender can be re-released back into society, and it completely undermines the circuit court, their decisions to impose a sentence, and the community is left trying to deal with somebody that's reintegrating back into society, and oftentimes we see that when someone reoffends, that, you know, had they served the remainder of their sentence or had some other intervention done while they were in the hands of Department of Corrections, perhaps that could have been done.
What do you think about that? Well, it is a fact that when I sentence someone to 10 years, they often don't do 10 years. Now, we know that, and in fact, the defendants know that as well. And, we factor that into sentencing. Sentencing is probably the hardest thing we do in criminal courts other than dealing with crimes with children. But that is true. People do. I'll send someone away to prison and they'll serve a few years. And once they leave our building, I don't have any authority over them anymore. Sometimes they ask me at a sentencing, hey man, how much time am I actually going to do? And I tell them, well, when you leave this building, there'll be someone in the Department of Corrections who will make that calculation. But I'm not that person.
Well, but we are pushing people out. The Department of Corrections has only so many beds. And if we want violent offenders to stay longer, then let's stop putting non-violent offenders, low-level drug offenders in the penitentiary. That's going to free up beds for violent offenders, and then they can stay there longer, and they can be off the street.
It's not true that the prison beds in Missouri are full of first-time nonviolent offenders. That is absolutely untrue.
And I didn't say that they're
drug
full.
offenses.
Right. We said drug offenders. There are people in the Missouri Department of Corrections that have drug possession charges.
Absolutely, probably their 6th or 7th time.
Well, and
Nobody in
that's
the
not
city-
necessarily true, because I've had people who were unable to be successful on probation, who have ended up in the Missouri Department of Corrections, and you have someone who's using a bed in the Department of Corrections on a possession charge, and at the same time, we're seeing serious offenders being released. We have to be smarter about how we treat people with, especially, I think, low-level drug offenses. They need to be treated with smarter. We need to be smarter about it. We need to find options for them that don't include tying up a penitentiary bed.
Chief, I'll go back to you just as we wrap things up here a little bit. How has your job changed from when you first were on the force to what you do now? And I'm thinking about a lot of what they're talking about here, some of the things that don't involve a set of cuffs.
We call it mission creep, that the job of law enforcement has spread into the social service arena so much now that we deal with people with mental health issues, we deal with people with homeless issues, substance abuse issues. And so we've really mission creeped out of just that prevention piece. And I don't remember who said it right, but if we have to arrest somebody, we actually have failed. Our goal is to try and keep that a crime from occurring. But we have to make sure that we're smart about it. And I hear your issue about the low-level drug offenders, except that those are the people that the neighborhoods are calling us about and are wreaking havoc in the neighborhood. So while I agree incarceration might not be the answer, we don't have any other options right now that seriously address those issues so we can have more room for violent offenders. And you're right, everybody at the table has to step up. The courts have to step up, the elected officials have to step up, you have to step up and do it, but that's how it's changed. We've mission creeped out so much that at 11:30 at night, when you need help, the only people that come are the police departments. There aren't defender prosecutors there aren't prosecutors. We're the only ones that are there. We fill a need in the social service program that we're not fully equipped to do, and we shouldn't be equipped to do.